My name is Darcy Ingram, and I am 32 years old. Exactly 3 days before my wedding, my dad called my cell phone. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in my workshop, trimming fresh white roses for my wedding centerpieces. Dark potting soil packed under my fingernails, my favorite playlist playing quietly on a low volume. The caller ID flashed dead. So I picked up the phone using my elbow because both of my hands were wet. 6 words. That is absolutely all it took to break a lifetime of hope. I am not walking you down the aisle. I slowly set the heavy pruning shears down on the wooden counter. I deliberately wiped my wet hands on the thighs of my denim jeans. I said absolutely nothing for maybe 5 agonizing seconds, which does not sound like a very long time until you are the specific person silently counting them. Vanessa says it would deeply upset her. My dad finally continued, his voice tight and uncomfortable. He actually said the words, "my sister," out loud as his defense. Vanessa is my sister. She is 3 years older than me, married to a wealthy man, has 2 beautiful kids, and is apparently still the absolute, undeniable center of every single decision my parents make in this life, even the decisions about my own wedding. Your sister is going through a very rough time right now, Darcy, my dad added, adopting his placating tone. Her marriage, you know. I did know, but this was my wedding day, not hers. Exactly 10 minutes later, my mom called to efficiently finish the hatchet job. Just go solo, Darcy. Stop making unnecessary drama out of this. Lots of modern, independent brides walk alone nowadays. She said the words perfectly flatly, as if she were reading a travel brochure about a place she had absolutely no intention of visiting. 48 hours later, 200 guests would turn around in their seats when those heavy barn doors finally opened, and the man proudly holding my arm would absolutely not be my biological father. I grew up in Ridgewood, Connecticut. It is a town of pristine white clapboard houses, loud leaf blowers on Saturday mornings, and the specific kind of wealthy, suburban atmosphere where everyone knows the exact shape of your expensive mailbox, but doesn't bother to learn your middle name. Vanessa was always the bright one. She got straight A's on every report card. She was the aggressive captain of the high school debate team. She had elegant piano recitals where my parents proudly sat in the absolute front row, recording every second with a video camera. My dad introduced her at neighborhood summer cookouts the exact same way every single time. This is Vanessa. She is going to be a highly successful lawyer. He always said it with such conviction, as if it had already happened and was printed in a textbook. I was the other daughter. I was the one who came home every afternoon with mud on my sneakers and dark dirt ground into my knees. I built a functioning greenhouse in our suburban backyard entirely by myself when I was 14 years old. I used discarded scrap, what I dragged over from a neighbor's messy home renovation. I bought heavy plastic sheeting using my own allowance money from the local hardware store. I used a rusty, squeaky hinge I manually pulled off an old, abandoned kitchen cabinet. The structure stood 7 feet tall, and I will be the first to admit that it was absolutely not pretty. It leaned slightly to the left, but it grew massive, vibrant red tomatoes the exact size of my fist by the time August rolled around. That specific year, my middle school science fair happened to fall on the exact same Saturday as Vanessa's prestigious regional spelling bee. I confidently entered my greenhouse tomatoes into the fair. I brought heirloom seeds, meticulously charted my controlled soil pH levels, and displayed a thick growth journal packed with daily progress photos. I won absolute first place. A shiny, crisp blue ribbon was pinned proudly to my cardboard poster board by the time my dad finally walked into the school gymnasium. He walked into the room exactly 40 minutes late. The science fair judges were already actively stacking the folding chairs to go home. "Sorry, kiddo," he mumbled, barely looking at me. Vanessa's spelling event ran a little long. He casually glanced at my blue ribbon, gave a quick, non-committal nod, and said, "Good job." He said it in the exact, distracted way you might casually praise a total stranger's kid while standing in line at the grocery store checkout. Then, he immediately pulled out his cell phone to check his emails. That ugly, beautiful greenhouse stayed, standing in our backyard for 9 long years. I painstakingly repaired that rusty cabinet hinge twice. I replaced the torn plastic sheeting once after a severe winter storm. My mom constantly complained to her friends, calling it a neighborhood eyesore. My dad called it absolutely nothing. He simply never mentioned its existence again. But that greenhouse stubbornly kept growing massive tomatoes every single summer, regardless of whether anyone in my family bothered to notice or not. My high school graduation ceremony fell on a humid Thursday evening in June. That exact same week, Vanessa excitedly received her formal acceptance letter to Columbia University's elite MBA program. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided to combine the two celebrations into one single, lavish family dinner at Restore Luca, the most expensive Italian restaurant downtown. 3 formal toasts were given that night. All 3 speeches were exclusively about Vanessa. My dad proudly raised his expensive glass of red wine to our brilliant Columbia girl. My mom wiped away dramatic, happy tears and announced to the table that she always knew Vanessa was destined for greatness. Vanessa then stood up and tearfully thanked them for always believing in her dreams. I sat quietly at the end of the table, ate my expensive pasta, and politely clapped my hands in the exact right places. Not one single person at that table mentioned my high school diploma. I had proudly graduated with a stellar 3.7 GPA and had officially received an acceptance letter to the University of Connecticut's highly competitive horticulture program. I had paid my own college application fees using the cash from the landscaping jobs I had been independently running since my sophomore year, mowing massive lawns, aggressively weeding gardens, and planting complex flower beds for 6 different neighbors at $40 a pop. When I finally told my mom about pursuing the horticulture degree over dessert, she set her coffee mug down sharply and looked at me as if I had just said something offensive in a foreign language. That is absolutely not a real career, Darcy. 8 words. She said them exactly once to my face, and apparently she repeated them many, many more times behind my back to anyone who would listen. Ruth Kellerman, our neighbor 3 doors down and my late grandmother Eleanor's absolute closest, dearest friend, told me years later that she had accidentally overheard my mom complaining on the phone to her sister, saying the exact same thing. Darcy is literally studying gardening at college. I do not even know what to tell my friends at the club. Vanessa's exorbitant MBA tuition was paid completely in full in cash by my parents, $22,000 a year. I know the exact painful number because Donna, my mother, loudly mentioned it at the Thanksgiving dinner table as if she were delivering a proud public service announcement about their extreme generosity. My state college tuition? I paid every single cent of it myself. I worked grueling landscaping jobs in the blazing heat during the summers. I took on exhausting greenhouse maintenance work on campus during the school year. I took out suffocating student loans to cover the rest of the balance. Nobody ever announced my rising debt balance at the dinner table. Vanessa eventually married a man named Preston Hale exactly 3 years after graduating from Columbia. He worked in high-level investment banking. He wore a severe, custom-tailored charcoal suit to their rehearsal dinner. He wore diamond cufflinks that cost significantly more than my entire truck payment. My parents positively glowed at their extravagant country club wedding as if they had personally arranged the stock market to make the union happen. Then, inevitably, the precious grandchildren came along. Lily arrived first. She is now 5 years old. Owen arrived 2 years later. He is now 3. My dad officially retired from his lucrative insurance firm the exact same year little Owen was born, and those 2 kids instantly became the absolute, undeniable center of his entire universe. He happily drove to Vanessa's massive house in Darien 3 times a week. He spent days building Lily a custom wooden swing set in the backyard. He patiently read Owen the exact same children's train book 47 times in a row because Owen would scream if he ever stopped. Vanessa definitely noticed this intense devotion. She noticed it the exact way you notice a heavy mechanical lever that you can pull to get exactly what you want. The very first time she actively used her own kids as emotional leverage was over holiday seating arrangements. Vanessa aggressively wanted the head of the table for Christmas dinner. My dad immediately gave it to her, moving his own chair. The second time was about an expensive professional family photo. Vanessa decided she wanted the picture retaken entirely without me awkwardly standing in the background. My dad quietly asked me to please step aside so they could get a core family shot. The third time she pulled the lever, I heard it happen myself. My dad had put his cell phone on speakerphone while he was looking for a pen. He completely did not realize I was standing quietly in the kitchen making tea. If you walk her down the aisle, Dad, I will absolutely not bring the kids to your house for Christmas. My dad paused. I could clearly hear his heavy, conflicted breathing through the phone speaker. Then came Vanessa's voice again, calm, cold, and heavily practiced. I mean it, Dad. It is just way too much emotional stress for me right now. You know exactly what my marriage is going through. My dad sighed deeply. Okay, Nessa. Okay, I won't do it. My mom walked into the kitchen exactly 30 seconds later and saw the devastated look on my face. She instantly knew I had heard the entire betrayal. Her immediate response was absolutely not an apology. She is their mother, Richard, my mom said firmly to my dad, completely ignoring my tears. Do not push her on this. We need to see the kids. That was the absolute, unshakable hierarchy of my family. Vanessa was at the very top, followed closely by the grandchildren, then my parents' personal comfort and social standing. Then somewhere far, far below the local property taxes was me. I met Marcus Delaney on a rainy Tuesday in April, exactly 3 years ago. I was waist deep in mud, aggressively planting a massive, complex rain garden for a county drainage project along Route 12. He was the lead structural engineer actively building the concrete bridge 60 yards upstream. We both happened to show up at the job site at 6:30 in the freezing morning. We both drank bitter black coffee out of dented metal thermoses. He saw me struggling, hauling a massive, heavy, dirt-covered root system out of the back of my pickup truck bed, and he walked over without ever being asked. Need a hand with that? He asked. I have got it, I grunted, straining. I know you've got it, he smiled. But my coffee is done and I am bored. That was the very first sentence Marcus ever said to me that was not strictly about soil erosion or drainage grades. Our first official date was a long, nerdy walking tour of a local commercial plant nursery, followed by eating cheap tacos from a truck in a gravel parking lot. He had wet dirt caked on his heavy work boots. I had wet dirt on mine. It was the most relaxed, natural, and wonderful evening of my entire life. He introduced me to his dad just 2 weeks later. Frank Delaney is 63 years old, a retired, lifelong carpenter. He has rough, calloused hands that look exactly like worn leather gloves someone accidentally left out in the baking sun for way too long. He lived completely alone in the exact same house he had lovingly built with his own 2 hands for Marcus's mom, who tragically died of aggressive pancreatic cancer 8 years earlier. There was a massive, detached workshop in the back of his property with fine sawdust permanently coating every single surface, and a dusty radio tuned to a classic rock station that I am relatively certain he never actually turned off. Frank casually called me kiddo by week 3 of knowing me. By month 2, he had spent hours building me a custom, heavy-duty wooden bookshelf for my landscaping workshop. White oak, painstakingly sanded perfectly smooth, flawless, dovetailed joints. He had quietly, carefully carved my initials into the inside of the left wooden panel. DI. It was carved small enough that you would completely miss it unless you specifically knew exactly where to look. I run my bare fingers over those carved letters every single morning when I unlock and open my shop. You've got dirt permanently under your nails, Frank noted with a grin the very first time he visited my messy commercial greenhouse. Good. That means you actually built something real today. Nobody in my entire biological family had ever said something so profoundly validating to me. Marcus proposed to me in the lush botanical garden I had personally designed and planted for the Ridgewood Public Library. It was a crisp October evening, and the massive Japanese maple trees were actively turning the deep, rich, violent shade of burgundy that makes people literally stop their cars on the street just to look at them. He got down on one knee right next to the carved stone bench I had painstakingly set into the gravel path 2 summers earlier. I loudly said yes before he even finished asking the question. That same night, I called my parents to share the news. My dad picked up the phone on the 4th ring. I told him I was engaged. There was absolute, deafening silence on the line for about 3 long seconds. Then, congratulations. Not, I am so incredibly happy for you. Not, tell me absolutely everything about the proposal. Just the flat, obligatory word you say when a random coworker announces they got a minor promotion. My mom aggressively took the phone from him. Is he from a good, wealthy family? She did not ask if I was happy. She did not ask about the ring, or the beautiful garden, or the romantic evening. She asked about his family's status the exact way she might ask a banker about a stranger's credit score. He is, I said defensively. His dad is a retired carpenter. Silence again. The specific, heavy kind of silence where someone is actively, aggressively choosing not to say the insulting thing they're currently thinking. I eventually sent their wedding invitation by hand. I had designed the heavy cardstock myself. Beautiful, intricate botanical illustrations along the border. A real, pressed green fern glued to the inside flap. I drove it over to their large house and quietly left it inside their metal mailbox because I simply did not want to stand there and watch their blank faces when they opened it. I also formally asked my dad to walk me down the aisle. He said yes quickly, almost reflexively, the exact way someone agrees to hold an elevator door for a stranger. Marcus said what he always says whenever I foolishly give my parents a chance they absolutely have not earned. He put his warm hand on my knee and looked at me with those steady, grounding brown eyes. You know exactly who they are, Dar. I know, I sighed, but I just want to give them one more chance to be parents. He simply nodded. He never tells me what to do with my toxic family. He just quietly makes absolutely sure I have somewhere safe and soft to land afterward. The devastating call came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 days before the wedding. I was standing in the workshop trimming the absolute last white roses for the reception centerpieces. 14 massive arrangements, each one painstakingly hand-tied with ribbon. The radio was playing something folksy with a fiddle, and I was happily humming along when the cell phone lit up brightly on the workbench. Dad, I wiped my wet hands on my jeans and picked up the call. Darcy, I need to tell you something. His voice was the exact clinical tone he used when he was about to deliver terrible financial news to an insurance client. Steady but entirely detached. Professional emotional avoidance. I am not going to walk you down the aisle. The heavy pruning shears were still firmly in my other hand. I set them down slowly. The exact, careful way you set something fragile down when you're not sure you can hold it without violently breaking it. Vanessa says it would deeply upset her, he continued. Dad, Vanessa is not getting married. I am. She says seeing me give you away to a husband would just be way too painful for her right now. Her marriage is going through a rough patch. You know that. So, my actual wedding day is entirely about her feelings. Silence, long and heavy. I could faintly hear the television blaring in his den in the background. Some loud game show. I am sorry, Darcy. I did not yell at him. I did not cry. I asked him exactly one question, the absolute only question that mattered. Did Vanessa aggressively threaten you with withholding the kids again? More suffocating silence. Then his voice dropped much lower, as if he were terrified someone in his own house might hear him. She said if I walked you, she absolutely would not bring Lily and Owen over for Christmas morning. There it was, the lever. The exact same emotional lever she had been viciously pulling for years, and a lever he had been cowardly folding to every single time. His access to his grandchildren was traded for his youngest daughter's wedding day, and he willingly chose the trade without even blinking an eye. "Okay, Dad." "Darcy, please understand," I said. "Okay." I hung up the phone, set the device on the workbench, picked up the sharp shears, and meticulously finished the 14th flower arrangement. My hands did not shake. I desperately wanted them to. Shaking would have meant I was actually surprised by the betrayal. I was not surprised. I was just finally, utterly done pretending I might be. My mom called me exactly 10 minutes later, right on schedule. Donna Ingram absolutely does not leave messy emotional loose ends. "Your father told you the news," she stated. "Yes." "Darcy, do not make this a bigger deal than it is. Just go solo. Lots of modern, strong brides walk alone. It is actually quite empowering if you really think about it." She said the word empowering the exact same way someone says the word organic when they aggressively do not buy organic food. "Mom, I asked Dad to do this a year ago. He said yes." "Things change, Darcy. Your sister is hurting right now, and you are not." Pause. I heard her take a deep breath over the line. The measured, theatrical kind. The kind she uses right before she says something she has already decided is perfectly reasonable. "You have Marcus now. Vanessa has absolutely no one right now." I almost laughed out loud. Almost. Because the twisted, manipulative math of that statement was so perfectly, fundamentally Donna. Vanessa's pain always outweighed mine, because Vanessa's pain always belonged to Vanessa. Not because her pain was actually larger or more valid, because it was hers. Stop making drama, Darcy. This is absolutely not the hill to die on. I hung up the phone, walked out of the shop to the back porch, and sat heavily on the top wooden step. The crisp October air was cold enough to clearly see my breath, but not quite cold enough to force me back inside. I held my phone tightly in both hands and stared blankly at the massive garden I had planted entirely by myself when I moved into this house 4 years ago. The blue hydrangeas along the wooden fence, the fragrant lavender by the stone walkway, a delicate dogwood tree I had put in the very first spring that was now taller than me. Marcus found me sitting there 20 minutes later. No tears, no screaming. Just sitting silently, holding the phone like it was a heavy, dangerous object I was not sure I wanted to keep. He sat down closely next to me. He did not ask what had happened. He did not say, "I told you so." He just put his strong, warm arm around my shivering shoulder and quietly waited. After a long while, I stood up, walked back through the dark workshop, and stopped at the heavy oak bookshelf Frank had built for me. I ran my fingers slowly along the rough inside panel, found the deeply carved letters, traced them twice with my thumb to ground myself, and then I finally went to bed. Wednesday morning, exactly 2 days before the wedding, the heavy, suffocating weight of my biological family's betrayal hung in the crisp autumn air of my kitchen. But Marcus Delaney moved through the space with the steady, unshakable calm of a man who builds bridges for a living. He stood at the stove making eggs, scrambling them perfectly soft the exact way I like them, and sprinkling them with fresh green chives he had carefully snipped from the terracotta windowsill pot, the very same pot he meticulously keeps alive for me because I, despite successfully running a highly profitable commercial landscaping and horticulture business, somehow inexplicably managed to overwater and kill all of my indoor houseplants. He slid the warm ceramic plate onto the wooden table, poured 2 steaming mugs of dark roast coffee, sat down directly across from me, and simply waited in the comfortable, supportive silence that had defined the last 3 years of our relationship. "My dad is definitively not walking me down the aisle," I finally said, the words tasting like dry ash in my mouth. "I heard you on the phone in the workshop last night," he replied, taking a slow sip of his coffee before looking at me with those deeply grounding, steady brown eyes, asking not how he could aggressively fix it, not demanding to call my arrogant parents to scream at them, but simply asking the only question that mattered. "What do you want to do?" That is the absolute essence of Marcus. He does not arrogantly swoop in to rescue you like a dramatic savior, but rather he stands firmly right next to you, evaluates the structural integrity of the crisis, and quietly hands you the exact tool you need to rebuild. I absolutely do not want to walk down that aisle alone, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Then you will not walk alone, he stated with absolute, mathematical certainty, setting his mug down and looking at me the exact way he looks at a complex architectural blueprint. Calm, hyper-focused, and already calculating 3 logistical steps ahead. My dad has been obsessively practicing tying his new silk tie in the bedroom mirror since the day we announced the engagement, watching YouTube tutorials twice last Sunday just to get the Windsor not perfectly symmetrical. I offered a small, watery smile, the very first genuine expression to cross my face in 12 excruciating hours. But the heavy reality of the situation immediately pulled me back down. I cannot ask Frank to do that, Marcus. It is just way too much to ask of a man who isn't even my real father. Marcus reached across the table, covering my dirt-stained, calloused hand with his own. Darcy, that man happily spent weeks building you a massive, custom, white oak bookshelf for your workshop that he absolutely did not have to build. He willingly drives 40 minutes out of his way to your shop every single Saturday morning just to grease and fix rusty door hinges you never even asked him to fix. And he permanently set a place for you at his Sunday dinner table exactly 2 months after we started dating, and has not removed that chair since. I stared down at my cooling eggs, my vision blurring slightly as Marcus softly added, "He has been patiently waiting for you to let him in, Darcy. He just did not want to overstep your biological father's boundaries." The sheer overwhelming thought of it made something thick and calcified violently crack open deep inside my chest. Not a crack of agonizing pain, but the brilliant, radiant warmth of a profound realization that the exact parental figure I so desperately needed had been standing quietly in the background for 3 entire years, meticulously sanding wood in his dusty garage, affectionately calling me kiddo, and reliably showing up for every single milestone event that my own biological father had cowardly chosen to skip. "Okay," I breathed out, the tension leaving my shoulders. "I will drive out and ask him today." Exactly 1 hour later, my cell phone buzzed on the counter with a call from Jeanette, my fiercely loyal best friend, my brilliant maid of honor, and the specific kind of fiercely protective woman who will bluntly tell you your hair looks terrible right before a date and then expertly fix it for you in 90 seconds flat. She had just run into my sister, Vanessa, at the upscale, overpriced salon in Darien that morning. They apparently shared the same expensive colorist. And in a wealthy, claustrophobic town like ours, gossip has incredibly long, suffocating arms. "Your sister was sitting in the styling chair right next to me," Jeanette reported, her voice thick with disgust, and she was absolutely not being subtle about her ongoing campaign against you. I closed my eyes, dreading the answer, but asked anyway, "What exactly did she say?" Jeanette sighed heavily into the receiver. She was aggressively complaining to the colorist about your upcoming wedding, loudly whining about how incredibly stressful the entire ordeal is for her, and complaining about how it is selfishly making absolutely everything about Darcy again. I tightly gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Again, that was her favorite venomous word. She had actually said, and Jeanette quoted her verbatim, "Darcy always greedily demands the attention now, ever since she started that silly little garden business. It is like the rest of our family doesn't even exist to her." I almost dropped the phone right there on the tiles. Darcy always gets the attention. Me, the forgotten daughter who had proudly won a middle school science fair, speaking to a completely empty folding chair. The daughter whose own high school graduation dinner was instantly, effortlessly hijacked and transformed into a Columbia MBA acceptance party for her older sister. The daughter whose chosen, passionate career path was publicly and maliciously labeled not a real job by her own mother. She also said, Jeanette continued, her tone softening with intense sympathy, "And I truly wish to God I were making this part up, Darcy, but she actually said that your commercial landscaping business is not even real work. There it was, laid bare in the bright salon lights. The exact same toxic sentence, Donna's venomous, dismissive words resting comfortably inside Vanessa's mouth, passed down effortlessly from mother to daughter, like a bitter family recipe that absolutely nobody had asked to inherit. "She is not actually upset about the logistics of your wedding, Dar," Jeanette explained, cutting straight to the psychological core of the issue. "She is violently, fundamentally jealous of you. You have Marcus. You have your wildly successful business. You have a beautiful, authentic life that absolutely does not require her or your parents to validate it. And she fundamentally cannot stand the fact that you are thriving outside of their control." I sat in silence at the table with that profound realization for a long minute, knowing that Jeanette is usually right about most things in life, but she was absolutely, undeniably right about this specific dynamic. Vanessa did not maliciously demand that my dad back out of walking me down the aisle because seeing him do it would genuinely cause her emotional pain. She demanded he stay home because my independent happiness was a terrifying, rogue variable that she could no longer control, and forcefully dictating the terms of my aisle walk was the absolute closest she could possibly get to establishing dominance over my joy. I should probably tell you about what happened at Thanksgiving last November to put this all into its proper, devastating context. Vanessa had hosted the massive holiday dinner at her sprawling estate in Darien because Donna had aggressively insisted on it, constantly bragging to the extended family that your sister has the much bigger, more formal dining room, which was technically a true architectural fact, but was also completely beside the emotional point. Her husband, Preston, sat stiffly at the absolute head of the long mahogany table wearing a crisp, designer dress shirt that probably cost significantly more than what I typically charge a client for a full, commercial garden installation, and he blatantly, disrespectfully checked his glowing cell phone exactly 11 times during the meal. I know the exact number because I was seated directly across from his arrogant face, and there was absolutely nothing else to look at while Donna endlessly, breathlessly bragged about the exorbitant cost of Vanessa's imported Italian kitchen marble. Vanessa was unnervingly loud that entire night, not the normal, joyous, wine-fueled holiday loud, but the specific, desperate, manic kind of loud where a host is frantically trying to fill the dead air in a room so that absolutely nobody hears the deafening, miserable silence echoing underneath her marriage. She laughed far too hard at jokes that were not remotely funny. She aggressively refilled wine glasses that were still more than half full, and she tentatively reached out to touch Preston's forearm twice, to which he reacted with absolute, chilling physical indifference both times. Then her innocent 5-year-old daughter, Lily, dropped the bomb. Lily had mashed sweet potatoes smeared on her little chin, and she asked the question the exact same way 5-year-olds ask everything, with brutal clarity and without possessing the social awareness to know what the horrific implications meant. "Why does Daddy sleep on the couch in his home office now?" The entire crowded dining room table went instantly, horrifyingly quiet. Preston slowly looked up from his cell phone screen, his jaw tightening into a furious line. Vanessa's face did something I had never, ever seen it do in my entire life. It completely folded in on itself, not displaying righteous anger, not showing minor social embarrassment, but projecting something terrifyingly dark and broken underneath both of those emotions. My dad awkwardly cleared his throat and loudly asked little Owen if he wanted another warm dinner roll, desperately trying to change the subject. But I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa's hands. They shook violently when she reached out to pour her third glass of red wine, a small, undeniable tremor lasting exactly 2 agonizing seconds, before she aggressively straightened her spine, plastered on a terrifying, fake pageant winner smile, and cheerfully passed the cranberry sauce down the table as if the fabric of her reality had not just ripped wide open in front of us. I understood something profound and tragic that night. Vanessa's highly curated, wealthy marriage was not just going through a rough patch. It was actively, violently crashing straight through the floorboards into the basement. And instead of acting like an adult and dealing with the wreckage of her own life, she was frantically, aggressively rearranging the decorative furniture on top of the widening cracks, desperately trying to distract everyone from the smell of the smoke. My beautiful, joyous wedding was simply the latest, most convenient piece of heavy furniture she needed to shove across the room to hide the massive, gaping hole in her own existence. On Wednesday morning, just 2 agonizing days before the wedding, I climbed into my muddy work truck and drove out to Frank's house. He lives on a quiet, heavily wooded dead-end road off Route 9 in a small, blue-collar town called Chester, residing in a sturdy, brown-shingled, single-story house featuring a sprawling wraparound wooden porch he had meticulously rebuilt by hand in 2019, alongside a massive, detached garage that permanently smells of rich, linseed oil, sharp cedar, and honest, grueling labor. The dusty, paint-splattered radio in his expansive workshop plays classic rock at a staggering volume that strongly suggests he firmly believes the music of Led Zeppelin should be experienced as a mandatory background presence for all human activities. He was carefully, lovingly sanding the curved arm of a beautiful teak rocking chair when I pulled my loud truck into his gravel driveway. The wood possessed a gorgeous, deep grain, and he was wearing his heavy canvas work apron, the specific one with fine, white sawdust permanently embedded deep into the tough fabric, like a second, textured skin. I stood silently at the open threshold of the garage door for a full, hesitant 10 seconds before he finally noticed my shadow, stopped his rhythmic sanding, and looked up. "Hey there, kiddo!" He smiled warmly, blowing a thick cloud of sawdust off the smooth wooden armrest. "Fresh pot of coffee is already on inside." I stood frozen, my throat incredibly tight. Frank. He must have instantly heard the heavy, suffocating devastation trembling in my voice, because he immediately set the gritty sandpaper down on the workbench, turned his entire body to face me squarely, and wiped his rough hands forcefully on his apron, giving me his complete, undivided attention. My biological dad backed out of walking me down the aisle. I blurted out the ugly words rushing out of my mouth before I could stop them. Frank did not offer a pitying, "I am so sorry." He did not aggressively demand to know why. He did not shake his head in disgust or offer a long-winded, unsolicited opinion about my cowardly father, my toxic family dynamics, or the sheer absurdity of the situation. He just looked at me with those incredibly steady, deeply intelligent gray eyes, the exact same grounding eyes that Marcus possesses, and he asked me 5 simple, life-altering words. "When do you need me?" That was the entire sentence. That was the whole miraculous thing. There was absolutely no hesitation. There was no tentative, "Are you entirely sure about this?" There was no cautious, "Let me check my schedule and think about it." The man was peacefully sanding a rocking chair 1 second, and in the exact next breath he took, he was immediately, effortlessly offering to proudly walk me into my future as if the sacred honor had already been permanently written in ink on his calendar for months. Saturday at 1 p.m., I choked out through my tears. "I will be standing there at noon," he replied firmly, picking the sandpaper back up, returning to his task, before adding in a much quieter, thicker voice, "Kiddo, I have been desperately waiting for someone to give me permission to ask." I sat in my truck and cried violently on the winding drive home, the very first time I had allowed myself to release the tears all week. The next 48 hours moved with the swift, unstoppable force of a rushing river. Jeanette handled the chaotic, last-minute logistics with the calm, terrifying efficiency of a woman who has flawlessly planned 3 massive baby showers and once successfully organized a surprise birthday party for 50 people during a blinding nor'easter blizzard. She aggressively updated the formal reception seating chart, mercilessly reassigning the prestigious father of the bride seat at the head table, and marching down to the front row of the ceremony aisle to slap a pristine, calligraphy-written name card down right in the absolute center. Frank Delaney. It was the exact, highly visible seat my biological father was supposed to rightfully fill. Marcus immediately took his dad out suit shopping on Thursday evening after work, as Frank currently only possessed a moth-eaten sport coat from 2011 that he stubbornly swore still fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Marcus sent me a heartwarming photo directly from the department store fitting room. Frank standing tall in a brand new, sharply tailored charcoal gray suit, looking simultaneously immensely proud and slightly uncomfortable, his rough, scarred, working man hands sticking out awkwardly from the crisp, pressed white cuffs as if they did not quite belong to the same elegant outfit. Marcus texted underneath the adorable photo. He has literally asked me 3 separate times if his tie is perfectly straight. I sat down and wrote my wedding vows that exact same evening in the quiet solitude of my workshop. The magnificent white oak bookshelf Frank had built for me stood solidly to my left, while his latest project, a massive, heavy butcher block cutting board he had secretly started as our wedding gift, foolishly thinking I did not know about it, rested on the workbench to my right. I wrote them by hand on the back of a discarded landscape architectural sketch, crossing out generic lines, rewriting them with fierce intention, and eventually settling on something profoundly simple and undeniably true. My parents did not call me on Wednesday, they did not call me on Thursday, and they absolutely did not send a single text message to check on my emotional state. I anxiously checked my glowing phone screen twice on Thursday night, feeling a pathetic, lingering sliver of hope before finally shoving the device deep into the kitchen junk drawer and slamming it shut. Marcus noticed the gesture. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just quietly brewed a cup of chamomile tea and left the warm mug resting on my nightstand. I deliberately chose not to inform my parents about Frank stepping in, knowing they smugly assumed I would be forced to walk down the aisle completely alone and publicly humiliated. I decided to let them assume exactly that, knowing full well that when those heavy barn doors finally opened on Saturday afternoon, the undeniable answer to their cruelty would be standing proudly right next to me in a charcoal suit. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 days before the wedding, I was meticulously reorganizing the floral centerpieces in my workshop when there was a soft, hesitant knock at my front door. Standing on my porch was Ruth Kellerman, 68 years old, sporting her signature silver hair always pulled back into a tight bun. She lived exactly 3 houses down the street from my parents in Ridgewood and had been my late grandmother Eleanor's absolute closest, most fiercely loyal friend for over 40 years. When Eleanor passed away 11 years ago, Ruth was the one who sat vigilantly by her bedside at the very end, holding her fragile hand. She was also the exact same neighbor who had honestly told me about Donna maliciously calling my professional horticulture career just gardening behind my back at the country club. Ruth stood shivering slightly on my porch, her hands trembling as she held out a yellowed, sealed envelope. Your grandmother Eleanor expressly asked me to give this to you the week before she passed away, Ruth explained, her eyes damp with unshed tears. She made me swear to hold on to it until the exact week you were getting married. I have been carefully carrying it for 11 long years, Darcy, and I was honestly beginning to think the damn thing would outlast me. The thick paper envelope was soft and worn at the edges from a decade of storage. My grandmother's elegant, cursive handwriting was penned on the front, spelling just my name, Darcy. I invited Ruth inside, and I carefully opened the sealed envelope sitting at my kitchen table, while Ruth sat quietly across from me, offering a respectful, sacred silence. The handwritten letter was incredibly short, exactly 12 sentences long, because Eleanor had always been a fiercely practical woman who was ruthlessly efficient with her words. Darcy, when you finally read this letter, you are about to walk into the absolute most important room of your entire life. I desperately wish I could physically be there to witness it. I desperately wish I could be there to forcefully tell your overbearing mother to sit down, shut her mouth, and finally let you shine. I wish I could tell your distracted father to look up from whatever trivial thing is occupying his attention and actually see the magnificent woman you have become. But I know exactly how that toxic family operates, Darcy. So let me officially say the vital words that they will not. You have always been the one who builds things. From that scrappy, wonderful little greenhouse in the backyard to whatever beautiful life you're building now. You possess the rare magic to make things grow where absolutely nothing existed before. Do not ever wait for them to validate or see your worth. The people who actually show up for you are your real family. I love you endlessly. Go build something beautiful. I read the faded ink 3 separate times, the tears streaming freely down my face, before folding the parchment incredibly carefully and placing it securely inside the vintage clutch bag I planned to carry down the aisle on Saturday. Family is who shows up. Thursday night passed into the ether without a single phone call from my childhood home. Friday morning brought the exact same deafening silence. There was no text, no panicked voicemail, and absolutely no dramatic last-minute change of heart from Richard or Donna Ingram. Friday evening was the official rehearsal dinner. Frank drove the 40 minutes down from Chester, arriving a full 20 minutes early, and immediately began helping the stressed caterer physically move heavy wooden tables across the lawn because he simply could not stand to watch someone carry a folding table with incorrect, back-straining posture. There were exactly 30 guests in attendance, absolutely all of them from Marcus's side of the aisle, save for my college roommate Alexis, 2 wonderful women from the free greenhouse horticulture workshop group I run on Saturday mornings for local mothers, Ruth, Jeanette of course, and absolutely nobody from my own biological family. The converted dairy barn venue looked breathtakingly beautiful in the twilight, open sides letting in the crisp autumn breeze. Warm string lights draped elegantly across the exposed cedar beams and massive, wild, sprawling flower arrangements that I had meticulously designed and grown entirely myself, featuring fragrant lavender, delicate Queen Anne's lace, and late season, deep burgundy dahlias resting in antique copper vases I had hunted down at an estate sale in Litchfield. When it was time for the speeches, Frank stood up to deliver the toast. He held his champagne glass with the exact same firm, purposeful grip he uses when holding a sharp wood chisel. Firmly, steadily, and like he absolutely means it. I am notoriously not a man of many words, and if you ask Marcus, he will readily confirm that fact, Frank began, drawing a wave of warm, light laughter from the tables. But I will proudly say this. Exactly 3 years ago, a woman showed up at my son's muddy job site and effortlessly hauled a massive, heavy root ball out of a truck bed like the damn thing owed her money. I liked her immediately. He paused, his gray eyes locking directly onto mine across the room. I never got the chance to have a daughter of my own. God just made me wait a little bit longer to find her. The entire room went completely, devastatingly quiet. Jeanette aggressively pressed a cloth napkin to her streaming eyes. Marcus reached under the table and put his large, warm hand firmly on my knee. Frank proudly raised his glass high into the air. To Darcy, the woman who makes beautiful things grow. I looked closely at his wrist as he drank, noticing a faint, undeniable trace of fine sawdust caught deep in the fold of his crisp white cuff. He had come straight to the dinner from his workshop. He always came straight from the workshop, because that is exactly who he is. That was Friday night. Saturday was the wedding. That exact same Friday evening, 40 minutes south in the affluent suburb of Ridgewood, my father sat entirely alone in his dark, freezing garage. I obviously did not know this specific detail at the time. Jeanette gleefully told me the story weeks later, having heard it from a close friend in Ridgewood who happened to see Richard looking miserable at the local gas station and extracted the gossip. He sat in the empty bay of the garage where he used to park his luxury sedan, resting on a cheap metal folding chair, staring blankly at the tool wall. There was a single, faded photograph pinned to the dusty pegboard, a picture of me at 12 years old, proudly holding up a massive, vibrant red tomato from my homemade greenhouse, grinning at the camera like I had personally invented the concept of sunlight. He had pinned that photo up years ago and had apparently never bothered to take it down, even long after the physical greenhouse itself was aggressively dismantled and thrown away. Donna had forced him to tear the structure down the very week I left for college, sharply claiming, "It is a hideous eyesore, Richard, and it ruins the property value." Donna finally came out to the freezing garage at 9 p.m., wrapping her expensive cardigan tighter around herself. Are we actually going to this wedding tomorrow? She demanded. Richard looked at her, his face exhausted. I think we should. Fine, Donna snapped, crossing her arms defensively. But we are sitting in the absolute back row. I am not going to let Darcy maliciously turn this event into some kind of public statement against us. Richard simply nodded in defeat. He opened his cell phone, navigated to my contact name, and slowly typed a message. I am proud of you, Darcy. He stared at the glowing screen in the dark garage for a very long time. He read the 5 words back to himself, and then he cowardly deleted every single letter, locked the phone screen, slipped it into his pocket, and went silently inside the house. I did not find out about that deleted, pathetic text message until much later. But I think about it sometimes not with lingering sadness, but more with a kind of exhausted, detached understanding of who he is. My father is not inherently a malicious or cruel man. He is simply a profoundly weak one. And weakness, when it is allowed to sit comfortably in the exact same house as a controlling narcissist, inevitably becomes cruelty by default. He went to sleep that night without sending me a single word of support. At 9:45 p.m. on Friday evening, my cell phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Vanessa. I heard a rumor that you are not walking down the aisle alone tomorrow. Who exactly is walking you? I looked at the glowing screen, scoffed quietly to myself, placed the phone face down on the mattress, and absolutely did not reply. Exactly 11 minutes later, Jeanette forwarded me a screenshot of her own phone. Vanessa had frantically texted my maid of honor. Do you know who is walking Darcy tomorrow? She is being incredibly petty and will not answer my texts. Jeanette's brilliant, flawless response to my sister was a single, typed period. Absolutely nothing else. I loved her fiercely for that level of unbothered disrespect. Vanessa, spiraling out of control, immediately called my dad next. I only know this because Richard then frantically texted Marcus, not me, but my fiancé. At 10:15 p.m., Marcus silently turned his phone screen to show me the incoming message. Vanessa is incredibly upset right now. She thinks Darcy is deliberately bringing a stranger to walk her down the aisle just to publicly embarrass us. Maybe we should not attend tomorrow. Marcus stared at the message, his jaw clenching. He typed out a furious response, then deleted it. He typed another, even angrier response and deleted that too. Then he set the phone down heavily on the bedside table and looked at me in sheer disbelief. Your biological dad just asked me if we are actively trying to embarrass them at your own wedding. That is exactly what he just said. I took a deep, shaky breath, held it in my lungs for 3 seconds, and let it go. Donna eventually called Richard back into the bedroom, a fact I found out much later through the infallible Ruth Kellerman Information Network, which possesses neighborhood contacts I will never fully understand. Donna sharply told Richard that they were absolutely attending the ceremony. I will not give that ungrateful girl the public satisfaction of telling her friends that her own parents refused to show up, Donna declared. Classic Donna. She viewed attendance strictly as a strategic, defensive public relations position, not as an act of unconditional parental love. Then came Vanessa's final, desperate text of the night to my dad, forwarded later by the exact same Ruth network. If you two are going to the wedding, then I am coming too. So that was the ultimate explosive setup for the weekend. Saturday morning, a beautiful wedding, 200 expectant guests, a retired carpenter stepping into a charcoal suit, and 3 uninvited, miserable spectators looming in the back row who still arrogantly believed the entire day was secretly about them. Saturday morning dawned. I woke up at exactly 5:15 a.m. The house was pitch dark and perfectly silent. Marcus had slept over at Frank's house the night before. He claimed it was for tradition, though I strongly suspect it was mostly so that Frank would not have to anxiously pace his kitchen floor alone all night worrying about his tie. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat out on the back porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. The garden was still enveloped in that heavy, mystical early morning fog where absolutely everything looks like a muted watercolor painting that someone accidentally left out in the rain. The blue hydrangeas along the wooden fence were beginning to fade and droop. Late October inevitably does that to a garden, but the fragrant lavender still held on stubbornly. Lavender always holds on significantly longer than you expect it to. I checked my phone and found exactly 2 new messages. The first was from Frank, "Ready whenever you are, kiddo. The tie is perfectly straight." I checked it in the mirror 4 times. The second was from Marcus. "I will see you at the end of the aisle. I will be the one who absolutely cannot stop smiling." I looked down at my hands, wrapped around the warm mug. I saw the thick, permanent calluses on the pads below my index fingers, earned from years of aggressively squeezing heavy pruning shears. I saw the thin, faded white scar running across my left thumb from a disastrous greenhouse repair gone wrong when I was 17. I saw the dark crescent of potting soil jammed deep under the nail of my right ring finger that I must have somehow missed while scrubbing in the shower. These were the exact hands that had stubbornly built a functioning greenhouse at 14 years old. They were the hands that had meticulously planted thousands of lavender and hydrangea bushes across the county. They were the hands that had desperately dug flower beds for 6 ungrateful neighbors at $40 a pop to pay for college. They were the hands that had proudly signed a commercial business license, confidently shaken hands with massive corporate clients, and lovingly arranged 14 complex floral centerpieces for a wedding that my own parents could not even be bothered to attend with an ounce of grace. I finished my black coffee, washed the ceramic mug in the sink, took a long, hot shower, dried my hair, and elegantly pinned it up into a twist using the stunning pearl hairpin Ruth had given me along with Eleanor's letter. It had originally belonged to my grandmother. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw exactly what I expected to see. Not a weeping victim, not a broken, abandoned daughter, just a fierce, independent woman with dirt-stained hands and a crystal-clear plan for the most important day of her life. I picked up the vintage clutch bag containing Eleanor's letter and drove my truck to the venue. The venue was a magnificently converted dairy barn perched on a rolling green hill just outside of Ridgewood. It featured wide, open sides and massive, exposed cedar beams, the exact kind of rustic, elegant place that looks like it has been hosting high society weddings for a century, but was actually a functional, muddy dairy barn until a massive renovation in 2016. I had done every single floral arrangement myself. The room was bursting with wild, sprawling wildflower bundles sitting in antique copper vases, overflowing with fragrant lavender, Queen Anne's lace, late-season dahlias, and fresh sprigs of green rosemary, because my grandmother had always told me that rosemary was the universal symbol for remembrance. The altar was beautifully framed with a vibrant, climbing clematis vine that I had carefully trained to grow up a stunning wooden trellis that Marcus had built with his own hands. The entire barn smelled intensely like rich earth and crisp October wind. Jeanette was already bustling around the bridal suite when I arrived, having thrown the doors open. She had my massive makeup kit spread wide open on the vanity and a strong mimosa firmly in her hand. "You look exactly like a woman who has been wide awake since 5:15 a.m., she observed dryly. "Close enough," I smiled. "Sit down and let me work." She worked with blinding speed and terrifying precision. Foundation, blush, contour, and a striking, bold lip color that she confidently dubbed Quiet Power, which I am fairly certain she completely made up on the spot just to hype me up. Ruth arrived promptly at 10 a.m. carrying a small, worn velvet jewelry box. Inside rested a pair of breathtaking, vintage pearl drop earrings. "These were your grandmother's," Ruth said, her voice wavering slightly. "She wore these exact earrings to her own wedding ceremony in 1974. Something borrowed and something incredibly old, both in one." I held the cool pearls in the palm of my hand. They felt strangely warm, as if someone had just taken them off to hand them directly to me. Alexis and my 2 closest college friends arrived next, loud and joyful. The five of us crammed into the bridal suite, laughing as Jeanette obsessively fixed flyaway hairs, while Ruth sat quietly in the corner armchair with her hands folded politely in her lap, looking exactly like a woman who had been patiently waiting 11 long years to witness this exact morning. There was no mother hovering over me, no sister pretending to help. Jeanette caught me glancing nervously at the closed wooden door once. "Stop looking at that damn door, Dar," Jeanette commanded firmly, pointing a makeup brush at me. "Every single person who actually matters in your life is already standing inside this room." She was absolutely not wrong, but the distinct absence still stung deeply. It stung in the exact same dull way an old, faded bruise stings when you accidentally bump it against a piece of furniture you genuinely thought you had already moved out of the way. Then came a sharp, heavy knock at the door at exactly 10:45 a.m. Jeanette swung it open. Frank Delaney stood awkwardly in the doorway wearing his brand new, impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit. He wore a crisp, bright white dress shirt and a tasteful navy blue tie that Marcus had carefully picked out for him. His large hands hung loosely at his sides, still undeniably rough, deeply calloused and permanently scarred from 4 grueling decades of shaping wood, driving nails, and building sturdy things for other people to enjoy. He saw me standing there in my flowing, white wedding dress and completely stopped breathing. For a stoic, practical man who spends his entire life meticulously measuring what cuts down to the 16th of an inch, Frank is remarkably, beautifully imprecise when it comes to containing his own emotions. His gray eyes filled with heavy tears almost immediately, and his strong jaw tightened as he fought for control. He blinked twice incredibly hard, and then choked out, "Oh, kiddo!" "Do absolutely not cry right now, Frank," I warned him, my own voice violently trembling. "I just got my expensive, waterproof mascara applied. I am not crying. The sawdust from your shop just gets absolutely everywhere." Jeanette laughed loudly from across the room, breaking the tension, and Ruth smiled a knowing, gentle smile from her corner armchair. Frank reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a small, exquisite, hand-finished wooden box crafted from rich walnut. Inside the box was a breathtaking, handmade boutonniere constructed entirely of dried oak leaves and delicate baby's breath, tightly wrapped at the base with rustic twine. "I made this early this morning," Frank explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I figured buying generic, plastic-wrapped flowers from a sterile grocery store just wouldn't feel right for walking you down the aisle." I carefully, reverently pinned the arrangement to his wide lapel. The dried oak leaves were gathered directly from the floor of his workshop. They were the exact same white oak as my bookshelf, the exact same wood that had been a steadfast, reliable part of my daily life for 3 years, built permanently into the very walls of my routine. "You look incredibly beautiful," he said, stepping back to admire the dress. Then he paused and instantly corrected himself with profound sincerity. "No, you look incredibly strong." Nobody in my entire life had ever used that word to describe me on a day when I was traditionally supposed to just look beautiful, and it was exactly, fundamentally the right word I needed to hear. He took a quiet seat in the corner directly next to Ruth. The two of them sat there in companionable silence, a 63-year-old retired carpenter and a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher, looking like the most fiercely loyal, unlikely, and badass security detail in wedding history, patiently waiting for the barn doors to open. At exactly noon, I peeked anxiously through the heavy velvet curtain at the side of the barn. Marcus's side of the aisle was completely packed. It was overflowing with joyous aunts, boisterous uncles, loud cousins, and dozens of friends from his structural engineering firm. His cousin had brought a toddler who was already miraculously asleep in a stroller in the aisle. His old college roommate was frantically adjusting a crooked bow tie that looked entirely borrowed. My side of the aisle was significantly smaller, but it was absolutely not empty. Ruth's seat was prominently reserved in the very front row. Alexis and the college girls were laughing in the second row. 7 wonderful women from my greenhouse workshop the dedicated Saturday morning group where I teach exhausted local moms how to start organic vegetable gardens in their backyards. We're taking photos. 3 wealthy landscaping clients who had genuinely become close friends over the years were chatting. My brilliant accountant, Gloria, who once tearfully told me my meticulously organized quarterly taxes made her profoundly proud to do her job, was waving at someone. And then my eyes shifted and I saw the absolute back row. Far right side, 3 tense figures sitting as far away from the altar as physically possible. Richard was sitting stiffly in a dark suit, staring intently down at his expensive leather shoes. Donna was sitting rigidly upright, clutching her designer purse tightly on her lap as if it were a physical shield protecting her from the event. And Vanessa, wearing an overly elaborate dress that was slightly too formal and desperate for an outdoor, rustic barn wedding, was aggressively scanning the crowded room with the panicked expression of someone actively cataloging the fire exits. They actually came. My stomach violently dropped, not because I was afraid of them causing a scene, but because for one single, stupid, reflexive second, my desperate inner child's heart whispered, maybe they are finally here to make it right. Then, I watched Donna lean over and aggressively whisper something in Richard's ear. He nodded submissively without ever looking up from his shoes, and I instantly knew the truth. They were absolutely not here for me. They were here strictly so they could tell their wealthy friends at the country club that they were here. It was attendance as an alibi. I let the heavy curtain fall shut, completely blocking them from my view, and turned back to the room. Jeanette was expertly adjusting the ribbon on her bridesmaid bouquet. Frank was meticulously brushing an invisible speck of dust off his immaculate sleeve. Ruth was quietly reading Eleanor's faded letter one more time. I had shown the parchment to her that morning, and she had cried softly and happily for 3 straight minutes. The wedding coordinator stepped into the suite holding a clipboard. 15 minutes, ladies. The music started playing at 1 p.m. sharp. It was a live string quartet that Marcus had found through a musician friend. They began playing something incredibly soft and beautifully ascending. I do not know the exact name of the classical piece, but it sounded exactly like golden sunlight moving gently through the leaves of ancient trees. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle first. Alexis, then Sarah, and then Jeanette was the last to go. Jeanette paused at the heavy barn doors, looked back at me over her shoulder, and offered a fierce, conspiring wink. Then she stepped through the threshold, and the aisle completely swallowed her in bright, white light. Silence descended upon the venue. The brief, electrified, held-breath kind of silence where 200 people miraculously go entirely still at the exact same moment, and the only audible sound in the world is the autumn wind rushing through the open cedar sides of the barn. The coordinator gently touched my arm. Ready. I opened my vintage clutch bag, carefully took out Eleanor's letter, and read one single line to myself, the very last one. The people who show up are your real family. I folded the fragile paper, put it securely back into the bag, and firmly closed the brass clasp. Frank stepped up right beside me. He proudly offered his bent arm. His suit sleeve was crisp and pristine, but the hand extending from it was exactly the same as it had always been. Rough, incredibly warm, and deeply callous from 40 years of selflessly building sturdy things for the people he loved. I placed my hand gently on his strong forearm and instantly felt the unshakable, grounding steadiness of a man who absolutely does not shake under pressure. "You good?" he asked quietly, looking straight ahead. "I am perfectly good," I replied, my voice strong. "Then let us go out there and show them exactly what showing up looks like." The massive barn doors swung wide open. Brilliant light flooded into the dark entryway. It was that specific, magical October sun, hanging low and painted gold, catching the floating dust motes in the cool air, so it looked exactly like someone had joyously scattered handfuls of glitter from the rafters. 200 heads turned toward the back of the room simultaneously. And there we stood, perfectly framed in the doorway, Frank Delaney and Darcy Ingram. a retired carpenter and a professional gardener. Neither one of us related by a single drop of shared blood. Both of us standing exactly where we were always supposed to be. I felt his large, warm hand reach over and cover mine where it rested on his arm. It was incredibly steady, the rough, textured grain of decades of honest, grueling work pressed comfortingly against my cold skin. He took the first deliberate step forward, and I flawlessly matched his pace. We walked. I absolutely did not look at the back row. I didn't need to look. I looked straight ahead down the aisle, where Marcus stood waiting at the altar with wet, shining eyes and a massive, devastating grin that communicated absolutely everything his vows would say out loud later. This was my magnificent wedding day, and I was absolutely not walking alone. The doors were wide open. 200 people saw the truth, and the proud, steady man tightly holding my arm was absolutely not my father by blood. He was my father by choice. The sprawling aisle was exactly 60 feet long. I know the exact distance because I meticulously measured it myself with a tape measure during the venue walkthrough in late August to plan the floral runners. 60 feet of gorgeously reclaimed, dark oak planks. The profound, poetic irony of walking on reclaimed oak planks toward a brilliant, happy future that was quite literally given to me by a man who built his entire life with oak wood was not lost on me. Although I admit I did not fully process the metaphor at the precise time. At the time, I was entirely focused on counting Frank's deliberate steps. Left, right, left. Slow, heavy, and perfectly steady. It was the exact same methodical rhythm he uses when he carefully planes a rough board in his shop. Measured, intentional, deeply grounded, the kind of confident, unhurried pace that clearly says, I have done this a million times before in my bones, even if I have never actually done it in my life. The audible gasps from the audience started about 10 steps into our walk. They were not loud, disruptive gasps, but rather the small, involuntary, collective sounds that confused people make when they are rapidly putting together a shocking story in real time in their heads. Guests who personally knew Jeanette's friends, the loyal greenhouse workshop moms, and Gloria, my accountant, immediately understood the assignment. They smiled radiantly, beaming at us, and aggressively pressed white tissues to their streaming eyes. Guests who did not know the backstory looked at Frank in his charcoal suit, then frantically scanned the crowded room for someone who looked like the biological father of the bride, and eventually found a miserable, shrinking man hiding in the absolute back row who stubbornly refused to meet anyone's judging eyes. I absolutely did not look at Richard. I want to be incredibly clear about that fact. I did not turn my head an inch. I did not desperately search the shadows for his face. I did not give him the pathetic satisfaction of a longing glance, nor did I give him the cruelty of a pointed, triumphant glare. He did not exist in my peripheral vision. I looked warmly at Ruth, who was openly dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief in the front row, at Jeanette, standing proudly at the altar with her hand clamped tightly over her mouth to muffle a sob, and at the greenhouse workshop moms, 3 of whom were openly, beautifully weeping. Then I locked my eyes entirely on Marcus. He stood rigidly at the end of the aisle, his hands resting at his sides, his brown eyes overflowing with emotion. He nodded exactly once at Frank as we approached, not a casual, polite greeting, but a profound, heavy thank you. The specific, weighty kind of nod that honorable men exchange when using actual words would simply take too long, and the sacred moment is already absolutely perfect as it is. In the back row, I am told by reliable sources that Richard half stood up in a panic as we passed, caught his balance on the wooden pew in front of him, and immediately sat back down in defeat as Donna aggressively grabbed his arm to stop him from making a scene. Vanessa allegedly stared straight ahead at the altar with an expression that Ruth later accurately described as a devastated woman watching a massive steel door slowly close that she knows she can never, ever reopen. We reached the end of the aisle. The officiant smiled warmly at us. She was a wonderful woman named Reverend Keene. Short, sporting a neat bob of gray hair, possessing the specific kind of soothing, resonant voice that instantly makes you feel like absolutely everything in the world will be perfectly fine, even when you know it will not. Who gives this woman in marriage? Reverend Keene asked the traditional question, her voice carrying over the crowd. Frank cleared his throat loudly. He is absolutely not a man who comfortably speaks to large crowds. He builds beautiful things for them. He quietly fixes broken things for them. He happily feeds them massive Sunday roasts in his kitchen, and he generously sends them home with Tupperware containers full of leftovers. But he absolutely does not address them with a microphone. Today, however, he did. Her family does, Frank's voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing off the cedar beams. He paused for a fraction of a second, and then added in a much quieter, thicker tone, as if he were saying the words directly to me rather than broadcasting them to the massive room. All of us who showed up. The entire room exhaled a collective, shuddering breath. I heard a soft, immediate sob escape from Ruth in the front row. Jeanette's expensive, waterproof mascara was already completely ruined. Gloria, the stoic accountant, was aggressively using her thick paper wedding program as both a makeshift cooling fan and a tissue simultaneously. Frank turned his body to face me entirely, took both of my trembling hands in his rough ones, and squeezed them exactly once. His grip was the exact same powerful grip that had shaped the oak bookshelf, carved the heavy cutting board, and delicately assembled the boutonniere. It was the grip of a creator. "Go get married, kiddo," he whispered, his eyes shining. He gently placed my hand firmly into Marcus's waiting palm, took one respectful step back, walked over to the front row, center aisle, and proudly sat down in the prominent seat that had been meticulously labeled with his name that very morning. The exact seat my biological father was originally supposed to fill. Marcus leaned in closely and silently mouthed two profound words directly to his dad. "Thank you." Frank simply nodded, folded his rough hands neatly in his lap, and watched us. I noticed a fresh, tiny speck of pale sawdust resting on his right cuff. He always had sawdust on his right cuff. I turned back to Marcus, and the ceremony officially began. When it finally came time for the exchange of vows, I took a breath and said exactly what I had written alone in my workshop 2 nights earlier, sitting next to the oak bookshelf, scribbling on the back of a discarded landscape sketch. "I choose you, Marcus, and I actively choose the family we will build together, not the broken one we were accidentally given by birth, but the strong one we make with our own 2 hands every single day from the ground up." Marcus said his beautiful vows in return. I honestly do not remember the exact words he spoke. I only remember the absolute, overwhelming love radiating from his eyes. We were officially pronounced married at exactly 1:27 in the afternoon. The reception kicked off at 2 p.m. It was held in the same massive barn, with the wooden tables swiftly rearranged and the warm string lights fully illuminated overhead. The live band played something incredibly acoustic, folksy, and warm. People immediately flooded the dance floor. Owen, Vanessa's wild 3-year-old, ran chaotically between the tables, gleefully chasing a rogue gold balloon that had escaped its weighted anchor. Lily sat happily on Richard's lap in the back corner and innocently asked for a slice of cake. At 3 p.m., Frank stood up from the head table to deliver his highly anticipated toast. The loud room quieted down immediately, the exact way crowded rooms always do when a collective group of people can palpably feel that something incredibly real and unscripted is about to happen. I am going to keep this incredibly short because Marcus explicitly told me that if I rambled and talked for more than 2 minutes, he would aggressively play me off the stage with a loud trombone. Frank announced deadpan into the microphone. Peals of joyous laughter erupted from the tables. I do not currently own a trombone, so I believe his threat is genuine. He raised his champagne glass, his expression turning deeply sincere. The very first time Darcy came to my house for Sunday dinner, I had a pathetic, withered little fern sitting on the kitchen windowsill. It was actively dying. It had been slowly dying for an entire year. I am not a plant guy. I had completely given up on it. She walked into my house for the first time, took one look at the sad plant, and within 10 minutes she had aggressively repotted it with fresh soil, moved it to a completely different window with better lighting, and bluntly told me I was overwatering it. He looked directly at me, his gray eyes sparkling with unshed tears. I knew right then and there that any woman who takes the time to save a dying, forgotten plant without ever being asked to is also the exact kind of woman who will easily save a lonely, dying old man from eating Sunday dinner alone for the rest of his life. Absolute, stunning silence blanketed the barn. Then the entire room broke wide open. Deafening applause, uncontrollable tears. Jeanette immediately stood up from her chair and clapped so hard and so long that her palms turned bright red. People started talking animatedly after the emotional toast. They weren't talking to me directly, but rather talking loudly around me, the specific, deliberate way you talk at social events when you desperately want the person standing nearby to overhear your praise. She designed that incredible botanical garden at the Ridgewood Library, you know. Her landscaping company does the massive grounds at the county courthouse. Have you seen those blooms in the spring? Breathtaking. She runs a completely free horticulture workshop for struggling moms every single Saturday. She's amazing. It was the sweet sound of my hard work speaking completely for itself, echoing in a room full of people who showed up because they actively chose to be there, while my own biological family sat miserably at a dark corner table and contributed absolutely nothing to the joy. Richard finally found me, standing alone at the dessert table. I was slicing into the massive, 3-tiered lemon cake, my personal favorite flavor, absolutely not Donna's dictatorial choice of vanilla, when I felt someone step far too close into my personal space on my left side. I knew it was him before I even turned my head. He smelled exactly like the cheap, familiar aftershave he has worn every day since I was 7 years old. Old Spice, the classic liquid in the opaque white bottle. "Darcy," he whispered. I turned around slowly, the cake knife still in my hand. He was nervously holding a glass of tap water, not celebratory champagne, just plain water. The edges of his eyes were puffy and red, and his jaw was actively doing the tense, grinding thing it does when he is desperately trying not to say something that might accidentally come out sounding wrong or offensive. "That man," Richard started, his voice cracking slightly. "He did a really good job today. His name is Frank, right?" I nodded once, my face a blank, unreadable slate. "Frank, yes. He did a very good job up there at the altar," Richard stammered, staring at his water glass. "He did," I replied coldly. Agonizing silence stretched between us. Richard looked desperately at the lemon cake, at the rustic wooden table, at the string lights overhead, at absolutely anything in the barn that was not my face. He wanted to say, "I am so incredibly sorry." I looked at him, feeling absolutely no burning anger, and surprisingly, no sudden rush of forgiveness. I just offered him the flat, clear, devastating gaze of a woman who has spent 32 years helplessly watching a weak man consistently choose the cowardly path of least resistance. "Sorry that you missed the honor of doing it," I said quietly, cutting another slice of cake. "Or, sorry that everyone in this room saw you miss it." He flinched. It was a very small, microscopic flinch. The specific kind of painful, involuntary flinch that only happens when someone looks you in the eye and says out loud the exact, shameful truth you have been obsessively thinking about for 3 sleepless days. Before he could even formulate an answer, Donna suddenly appeared out of the crowd. She placed a possessive hand firmly on his elbow, aggressively guiding him away from me the exact way she always guides him. Firmly, dominantly, like steering a shopping cart with a broken wheel. "Richard, come sit down," she ordered sharply. She leaned aggressively toward me as she physically turned him away, her voice dropping to a low, highly controlled, venomous hiss, the exact same icy tone she had used on the phone on Tuesday night. "Do not make a scene here, Darcy." I calmly picked up the silver cake knife and set a perfect slice of lemon cake onto a porcelain plate. "I am absolutely not the one making scenes today, Mom," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "I am just cutting my wedding cake." She turned on her heel and walked away. Richard obediently followed her. He always follows her. The traditional father-daughter dance was scheduled for 4 p.m. Except, of course, it was not a biological father-daughter dance. It was Frank and me, stepping out onto the reclaimed wood of the barn floor under the warm, glowing string lights, dancing to a beautiful acoustic cover of Lean on Me that Marcus had specifically picked out, which predictably made Jeanette cry hysterically for the third time that afternoon. Frank danced the exact same way he builds furniture, incredibly carefully with intense, focused attention to exactly where his large feet were going. He held my right hand gently in his, and he kept his other large hand resting respectfully on my shoulder, absolutely not on my waist, because Frank is the exact kind of honorable man who respects a woman's physical boundaries, even in the middle of a crowded wedding dance floor. "I step on feet, just so you know," he warned me with a gruff, nervous chuckle. I know, I laughed. Marcus already told me. That boy has absolutely no family loyalty. I laughed louder. The entire room laughed with us. 200 people stood in a circle, watching a retired carpenter awkwardly but lovingly dance with a professional gardener, and everyone in the barn felt something profoundly, undeniably true vibrating underneath the acoustic music. At the dark corner table in the back, Vanessa watched us intently. Preston was noticeably not there with her. He supposedly had a mandatory, last-minute work trip to Chicago. Or, at least, that is the convenient, face-saving lie she had fed to Donna. The chair directly next to her was empty, and she was gripping the fragile stem of a champagne flute so hard her knuckles were white, clutching it like it personally owed her a massive debt. Ruth walked over from the dance floor and sat down calmly in the empty chair right beside Vanessa. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't overly warm. She was just a grounded, undeniable presence. The exact way Ruth does absolutely everything in life. Eleanor would have been so incredibly proud of Darcy today, Ruth stated simply, looking out at the dance floor. Vanessa snapped her head to look at the older woman, her eyes flashing defensively. "She would have been immensely proud of both of you, Vanessa," Ruth added softly, delivering the killing blow. "If you had ever actually let her be." Vanessa's eyes instantly filled with brimming tears. She slammed the champagne glass down on the table, stood up abruptly, and practically ran to the venue's bathrooms. She locked herself in there for 15 minutes. When she finally emerged, her expensive makeup was freshly, flawlessly reapplied, but her eyes were visibly angrily swollen, and her hands were still shaking violently, the exact same, undeniable tremor I had witnessed when she poured the wine at Thanksgiving. I saw her hurriedly cross the room, staying far away from the dance floor. I did not go to her to offer comfort. I did not send Jeanette or a bridesmaid after her to check if she was okay. I just kept dancing joyfully with Frank. I realized then that some doors in life close because you aggressively slam them shut in anger. Others close simply because the exhausted person on the other side finally stopped holding them open for you. I did not actually see my parents leave the venue. Jeanette told me later that evening that they had cowardly slipped out the back doors around 5 p.m., somewhere between the messy cake cutting and the lively bouquet toss. It was the exact quiet way you slip out of a crowded party that you were never truly invited to be a part of. The dark drive home from the barn venue to Ridgewood for Richard and Donna was exactly 40 minutes long. Ruth later heard the gossip from a chatty neighbor, who had heard it directly from Donna's loose-lipped sister, that neither of my parents spoke a single word for the first 20 agonizing minutes of the car ride. Then, Richard finally broke the suffocating silence, staring blankly at the dashboard. That man built her a massive, custom bookshelf for her workshop. Donna glared at him from the passenger seat. "What on earth are you talking about?" "In her workshop," Richard repeated, his voice hollow. "It's made of solid white oak, with her initials intricately carved onto the inside panel." Donna stared straight ahead at the dark road, her jaw locked. "When was the absolute last time we ever built her anything, Donna?" Richard asked, his voice cracking. No answer. The winding road between Ridgewood and their house runs directly along the edge of the Deep County Reservoir. It is a stretch of highway characterized by flat, black water, towering, dark pine trees, and the specific kind of monotonous, hypnotic drive that gives a guilty mind entirely too much uninterrupted time to think. "She did not even look at me," Richard whispered into the darkness of the car. "When she walked down that aisle, she did not look at me once. She was looking at Marcus. She was looking at absolutely everyone in that room except me. And she was right to do it, too." Donna said absolutely nothing in response. Richard pulled the heavy car into their pristine, suburban driveway. Donna immediately unbuckled her seatbelt, got out, and marched inside the house without looking back. Richard stayed sitting alone in the cold, idling car. The harsh fluorescent light inside the garage was still blazing from Friday night. The faded, curled photograph of a 12-year-old Darcy, proudly holding a massive red tomato, was still pinned securely to the dusty pegboard. The actual greenhouse was long gone. Donna had ruthlessly forced him to tear the structure down years ago, but the distinct, dark soil marks where the heavy foundation had once stood were still faintly, undeniably visible in the manicured lawn, even in the pitch black of the night. Some things leave permanent, undeniable outlines in the earth long after they are violently removed. Richard checked his cell phone one last time. There was no incoming message from Darcy. There was no message coming ever again. The wedding was officially over. His youngest daughter was married. A retired carpenter had proudly stepped up and done exactly what a real father was supposed to do. And the single, empty wooden seat labeled Frank Delaney at the absolute front of the church was the loudest, most devastating statement anyone had made all day long. Without saying another word, Richard turned off the car engine, walked heavily inside the house, and permanently closed the door. Monday morning, exactly 2 days after the wedding, I confidently opened the doors to my landscaping workshop at 7 a.m. It was the exact same routine as always. There was a massive new corporate order sitting on my drafting desk, a comprehensive landscape architectural design for the brand new children's wing garden at Ridgewood Memorial Hospital. It was a sprawling 12,200 square foot project. They requested sensory plants specifically designed for sick children in active recovery, texture gardens, resilient things that vulnerable kids could safely touch, smell, and hold in their hands to feel grounded. Marcus cheerfully brought me a hot coffee at 8 a.m. The green chives on the windowsill were still miraculously, vibrantly alive. Frank drove his truck over at 9 a.m. carrying the massive, heavy cutting board he had been secretly working on for weeks. It was a stunning piece of cherry wood featuring a flawless, inlaid walnut stripe running dead down the center. "For the happy newlyweds," he announced casually with a grin, acting exactly as if he had not fundamentally changed my life by walking me down an aisle 48 hours ago, acting as if it was just another regular, mundane Saturday in his life. I proudly set the heavy wooden board on the counter directly next to the oak bookshelf he had built for me 3 years ago. The exact same man, the exact same rough hands, the exact same reliable habit of showing up without ever needing to be asked. My cell phone buzzed aggressively on the desk at exactly noon. It was one single text message from Richard. "Can we talk?" I read the 4 words on the screen. I calmly set the phone face down on the slanted drafting table. I opened the massive blueprints for the hospital garden plans. I picked up a pencil and started sketching the primary sensory path. I drew in rosemary bushes for memory. I drew in thick patches of lavender for deep calm. I drew in sprawling mint for bright energy. I focused entirely on designing a space filled with resilient plants that give you something beautiful and healing just by simply existing near them. The scrappy little greenhouse I had built at 14 years old was only 7 feet tall, and it successfully grew tomatoes for exactly one ungrateful family. This new hospital garden would be 12,200 square feet, and it would grow massive, sprawling healing for hundreds of sick children who desperately needed a safe place to breathe. I picked up my sharp drafting pencil, drew the first sweeping line of the paved path, then the second parallel line, then mapped out the raised border beds, and finally sketched the grand entrance archway. Outside, the bright, golden October light moved slowly through my dusty workshop window and perfectly caught the carved wooden letters on the inside panel of the bookshelf. D. I. Carved small enough to miss if you were rushing, but carved deep enough into the oak to last for a lifetime. I absolutely did not answer Richard's text message. I had real, meaningful work to do. Exactly 2 weeks after the wedding, Vanessa finally called me. I was standing in the middle of a muddy job site, the hospital garden, aggressively measuring drainage grades in the dirt with a tape measure when her name unexpectedly illuminated my phone screen. I almost let the call go straight to voicemail. I almost hit the red button. But something deep inside of me, some lingering, stubborn remnant of the hopeful 14-year-old girl who had painstakingly repaired the rusty greenhouse hinge twice because she foolishly believed broken things could always be fixed, made me swipe the green icon and answer the phone. "Darcy, I am here," I said, my voice neutral. There was a silence on the line that lasted, so incredibly long I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the cellular call had dropped. Preston left me. I slowly, deliberately set my heavy metal measuring tape down into the dirt. He officially moved out of the house last week. Vanessa choked out, her voice trembling. He took all of his things while I was running errands at the grocery store. He just left a typed note on the kitchen counter. I waited, offering no immediate comfort, letting the reality hang in the air. Vanessa's breathing was ragged and uneven over the speaker. She wasn't aggressively, performatively crying for an audience. She was desperately trying not to cry. "I just thought you should know the truth," she whispered. "Okay," I replied flatly. Another excruciating pause stretched over the cell towers. Then her voice completely broke. Not dramatically, not in the theatrical, manipulative way she constantly performs for my parents to gain leverage, but quietly, devastatingly, exactly like a hidden, structural crack in a foundation wall that has been slowly, invisibly spreading for years and has finally, catastrophically reached the painted surface. I genuinely thought that if I could just keep Mom and Dad hyper-focused entirely on me and my drama, it would somehow fill the massive gap in my house, Vanessa confessed, sobbing softly. Preston was never there. The kids were not enough to fix the silence. I desperately needed to be the absolute center of something, anything. And your wedding was in the way of that attention. Your independent happiness was in the way. I let that massive, horrifying confession sit there in the open air. I did not rush to comfort her. I did not violently attack her or scream, "I told you so." I simply stood completely still on an active construction site, with thick mud caked on my steel-toed work boots, holding my phone tightly and listened to my older sister finally, brutally say the exact, ugly thing she had been hiding behind malicious manipulation for over 3 years. "Vanessa!" I finally spoke, my voice calm and incredibly resolute. "I truly, genuinely hope you eventually find the peace and healing that you so desperately need in your life right now. I absolutely mean that. But I am not your emotional cushion anymore. I absolutely cannot and will not be the sturdy thing you lean on while you actively push my head underwater to keep yourself afloat." She cried quietly into the phone, the sound of a woman whose illusions had all burned down. I let her cry. Then I politely said goodbye, hung up the phone, picked my measuring tape back up out of the dirt, and went right back to measuring the drainage grades. A physical letter arrived in my mailbox the following week. It was handwritten. I instantly recognized my father's handwriting. Small, sharply tilted, the exact, precise penmanship of an older man who had learned to write in a strict school that still mandated the use of fountain pens. It was not a cowardly text message. It was not an awkward voicemail. It was a physical, paper letter mailed with a real stamp, officially postmarked from Ridgewood. I opened the envelope entirely alone in my workshop, standing directly next to Frank's beautiful oak bookshelf. "Darcy," the letter began, "I absolutely should have proudly walked you down that aisle. I knew it in my gut the exact moment Vanessa maliciously asked me not to. And I knew it when your mother arrogantly told me it would be completely fine to abandon you. And I knew it to my core when I sat uselessly in the back row of that barn and watched another, better man do exactly what I was biologically and morally supposed to do. I chose wrong. I have been cowardly choosing wrong your entire life, and I have been pathetic enough to tell myself it was simply easier to keep the peace. It was not easier. It was just cowardly. I let your sister weaponize those innocent grandchildren as a brick wall between us. I let your mother loudly dictate that keeping the peace was the exact same thing as being a good father. It was not. Keeping their peace meant keeping you at a cruel distance. And I did it because I was fundamentally too terrified of what would happen if I ever stood up and pushed back against them. Frank Delaney fully earned the sacred honor that I foolishly, arrogantly threw away. He showed up for you. I did not. I absolutely do not expect you to ever forgive me. I do not think I would ever forgive me either if I were in your shoes. But I desperately want you to know that the photograph of you at 12 years old, grinning and holding that massive red tomato, is still pinned to the wall in my garage. And I deeply wish I had bravely told you back then what I absolutely should have said 1,000 times since that day. I am incredibly proud of you, Darcy. I always was. I was just too weak and pathetic to say it out loud. Dad, I read the devastating letter exactly twice, processing every word. I carefully folded the paper along its creases, opened my heavy desk drawer, and placed it gently inside, resting directly next to Eleanor's yellowed letter. 2 different letters, written by 2 different people, possessing 2 very, very different emotional weights. I absolutely did not reply to him. I used to foolishly, naively think that family was strictly defined as the people you were accidentally born to, the specific individuals who shared your DNA, your last name, and your childhood dinner table. I absolutely do not think that anymore. Family is the gruff, retired man who willingly drives 40 minutes out of his way to your dusty workshop on a Saturday morning just to fix a squeaky door hinge you didn't even ask him to fix. Family is a profound, validating letter written in a yellowed envelope from a fierce grandmother who has been physically gone for 11 years. Family is who shows up when it matters. That is my entire story. 3 miserable days of silence from the people who were supposed to love me, offset by 1 beautiful letter from a grandmother, and a humble carpenter who immediately said yes before I could even finish asking the question. If this story reminded you that family is always a conscious choice and absolutely not a blood obligation, share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it today, and thank you for being here to listen.